We're going to open with some prayer. So posture your hearts before God. Put your minds on Him. Father, we thank you for this time together. We thank you that we get to come in here and learn more about you. We thank you for awesome teachers. Father, we pray that your Spirit would rest in this place, that you would have your way today, God, in whatever you do, Father. In Jesus' name, amen.
Okay, we have been studying about the lineage of Christ with a focus on the women who appear in that lineage. And we've gone through Tamar and Rahab and Ruth, getting up to where we come to King David. So let's talk about King David for just a minute. When you hear the name King David, what are some words that describe him that come to your mind? He was the apple of God's eye, okay. If you were telling somebody about King David, how would you describe him? Anybody? Persistent. He was what? He was humble before God, okay. He believed in singing praise. What about his daily things that he did? He was a warrior, right? So that would make him what kind of qualities to be a warrior? As a warrior, what are some of the characteristics he would exhibit as being a warrior? Maybe strong, courageous, intelligent. All great things to say about King David. Go ahead and pop up our slide. What if I ask you about this name? Bathsheba. Give me some words to describe Bathsheba. Beautiful. It doesn't have to be what you think is the right answer or politically correct. Well, what's the first thing that pops in your mind when you hear that name? If you said somebody's like Bathsheba, what would that mean? Beautiful. Mm-hmm. A what? A pond? Okay. Okay, queen. If you read a lot of commentaries, these are the words that I came across. Seductress. That was one of them. Adulteress. That's how she's remembered. Naked. And if you pull up images, you're going to see a lot of naked art. Okay? So, very different words to describe. So let's just keep those in mind as we are going to now do this study about Bathsheba, because she's included in the lineage of Christ. Matthew 1:3-6. We see down at the bottom at 6, it says, "And Jesse, the father of King David, David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife." Well, it doesn't say Bathsheba, does it? It says Uriah's wife. So we have to think, well, why was that? And you would have to say, do we know who Uriah's wife is? Well, we know because we've studied the word. If you go to other versions, for example, the NLT, it does name, it says David was the father of Solomon, whose mother was Bathsheba, the widow of Uriah. So a lot of these things, like the New Living Translation, the Amplified, they intentionally add that information for more understanding. But if you go back to the King James, the New King James, some of the other versions, they just say the wife of Uriah. So there had to be a reason that Matthew worded it that way, that he didn't give her name. He noted her as the wife of Uriah. So that's something that we want to kind of also keep in mind and think about as we go along. So we read about Bathsheba in 2 Samuel chapter 11. So we're going to look at verse 1. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. So this first verse gives us kind of a time and setting for when this is taking place. And for lack of a better word, we call it a story. But that's not to imply that it's not a true story. It's an account. But in this story, it was the springtime. That was the best time for them to go out if they were going to have any kind of military campaigns. It's warmer, it's drier, the roads are dry. Now, as someone who is dealing with mud at their house because we're doing construction, that's my driveway is just mud. And I'm, trying to move your cars in and out through the mud. So it makes a lot of sense that they would go during the drier time. It would make travel easier. And Israel had been involved in this conflict with the Ammonites. So it was time to kind of resume that, amp that back up again. And typically the king would lead the men. David, we said he was a warrior. That's what he was known for, to take the men out into battle. But David, for whatever reason, he decides to stay home. And instead he sends Joab to lead them. Now, do you remember who Joab is? Who's Joab? He's kind of like the right-hand man. He was the commander-in-chief of his armies, but he's also David's nephew. David's brother, Zeruiah, that was his son. And his brothers were also very involved in the military doings. Now, David, like I said, he's a warrior. That's his thing. That's what he's known for. From slaying Goliath to fighting the Philistines under Saul, many other battles on his way to becoming king, taking Jerusalem, and even after this story that we're studying on forward, he led the troops. That's what he was known for. But at this time, and it doesn't give a reason, David decided not to go. He wasn't where he was supposed to be. It was a personal choice. Sometimes we make little choices, and those choices have big impacts, right? So he's not where he's supposed to be. Now, that per se in itself was not a sin. This is great. Welcome. Him not going to battle, that wasn't a sin per se, but it was definitely not in custom. The king was expected to take them out to battle. So it was like he had stepped away from his calling, what he was supposed to be doing, and gave it to somebody else. And you know what? He can do that, and you know why? Because he's the king. Exactly. He's the king. He can do whatever he wants. And he's only the second king that Israel has had. Saul was the first. So it's not been that long ago that they were still under the judges, and Samuel was their judge. So this is all still kind of new, but he's the king, and he can do whatever he wants. And the kings came about because with Samuel, his sons were supposed to take over being judges, and they were corrupt. And the people demanded a king. 1 Samuel, chapter 8, 6 through 18. But when they said, give us a king to lead us, this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, listen to all the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. As they have done from that day, I have brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods. So they are doing to you. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who reign over them will claim as his rights. Because he's the king, right? He can do it. Next one. Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, this is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. Your male and female servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys will take for his own use. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. You yourselves. Okay? When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. So if the king did not want to go into battle, the king didn't have to, because the king had the final say in everything, because he's the king. There's a quote from a British historian, may be familiar to you. It says, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." This is what happens when people get into a position of power if they're not careful, if they don't have that strong moral compass, if they don't have that, what should be the right attitude is that with great power comes great responsibility. But instead, it becomes a power trip. Abe Lincoln has a quote, and I always like, is it really Abe Lincoln? Because he says a lot of things on the internet. But it's, nearly all men can stand adversity. But if you want to test a man's character, give him power. What we do with power is very telling of our heart. So David had a lot of power. He was the king. He was also pretty popular as a king. You know, the people were the ones that said, we want you to be the king, you know. He had been first king over Judah, and then he had kind of the war with the house of Saul, and eventually he became king over all of Israel, uniting them together, and had many victories in battles. And, you know, staying home, he had a lot going on at home. He had a lot of wives and a lot of kids. But, you know, sometimes you can get distracted, right? He had, that says 6 wives because I don't think they count Michal. But, you know, he had been married to Saul's daughter Michal. I'm going to butcher all these names. Ahinoam, who had a son, her son was Anam. Abigail, the son was David. Maacah was Absalom and Tamar. Haggith, Adonijah. Abital, Shephatiah. Eglah had Ephraim. So he had all these wives and kids that could have kept him busy and out of trouble. You know, he had plenty to keep him busy at home if he focused on that. So here we are. David is staying home. He's already a husband. He's already a father. If he felt the need for any kind of female companionship, he had 6 wives right there at his disposal. And we know that he also had concubines. So he didn't have to go looking for love at all. He didn't have to go window shopping. But that's exactly what he did. 2 Samuel 11, 2-3. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, like you said, very beautiful. And David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite." So here we have the time of day. It's evening. In the King James Version, it says evening tide, which is kind of a poetic term for that time of dusk, sunset. It's dark. And David gets up from his bed. Was he alone? We don't know. He didn't have to be if he didn't want to. But he couldn't sleep. And he gets up and he takes a walk on the palace roof. Now, the palace roof, it would have been a flat area. It's not like, you know, he's not on that kind of a roof. It's a nice flat roof. He could see out over the kingdom. And he spies this beautiful woman bathing. Now, it wasn't a sin that he saw her. You know, sometimes we see things we're not supposed to see. Have you ever walked in on somebody in the bathroom or in their room changing clothes, or somebody's walked in on you? It's embarrassing, but it's like a quick close the door, turn your eyes. We don't stand there and stare and go, "How you doing?" You know, you know, that would be so wrong. So, you know, we just look away and we pretend it didn't happen because it can be embarrassing. That's your immediate reaction. But David didn't do that. He did, "How you doing?" He stood and he watched her bathing, and he was curious about her. And so he's like, I need to know who this is. So he sends somebody to find out who she is. And then he gets the name, Bathsheba. A beautiful name for a beautiful woman. Her name means daughter of oath or daughter of abundance. Bath is daughter, and Sheba translates to either 7, which is wholeness or completeness, or oath, promise or binding agreement. And how I always found it ironic, as thinking about it, that her name is Bathsheba, and he saw her in the bath. So I always thought that, when you have that young mind as a kid, you think stuff like that. But you know what? He gets more than a name. He doesn't just get a name. He doesn't find out who she is. He also finds out whose she is. Okay? So first of all, she is the daughter of Eliam. His name means God of the people, or God is my kinsman. And we see his name in the list of the mighty men in 2 Samuel 23 through 24. Eliphat, son of Ahashbe and Makite, Eliam, the son of Athopel the Gilonite. So Eliam. Eliam was her father. So these mighty men of David, they're often called the 30, though if you read through the list, there's actually 37, but some may have come and gone. And it's just easier sometimes to say the 30 instead of the 37. They were men of exceptional courage, combat prowess, dedicated to God, fiercely loyal to the king and their fellow soldiers. This was the cream of the crop among the warriors. They were a very elite circle, very well known to David. They protected the king, they fought for Israel, they fought for God. And this Eliam was also the son of Athopel, and he was a counselor to King David. So this is someone who's also King David is very close to. He said he was a Gileonite. Gilo is a city in the hill country of Judah. So these are Israelites we're talking about. Years later, this counselor, Athopel, he betrays David later on down the road with Absalom. And some commentators will say it's kind of like because of the hard feelings he had toward David because of everything that happened with Bathsheba. But that's just people reading things into it. Could be, could not be. But the important thing is David, when he heard these names, he knew these people. These were people that were part of his inner circle, people that were close to him, that he interacted with on a regular basis. Trusted people. People that put their lives on the line for him. Can you say red flag? This should have been a big red flag to David. Oh, Eliam's daughter. Yeah. It should have been a boundary right away. A warning, turn around, go the other direction. Then the second piece of information he got about her is not only is she the daughter of this person that I know that's a trusted person, she's the wife of Uriah, the Hittite. Now, the Hittites were among the original inhabitants of the land, but many of them did become part of the Israelite family. They pledged their allegiance to God and king. And so Uriah was one of these men. And he was also one of the mighty men. As we see, Uriah the Hittite. There were 37 in all. So this is probably how he ended up married to Eliam's daughter, because he was part of the mighty men. Then this marriage happened between Uriah and Bathsheba, Eliam's daughter. Okay. So the fact that he is part of the mighty men tells us a little bit about Uriah's character. Now we don't get much else. We're going to get something, as we go on, we'll learn a little bit more. But the fact that he was among the mighty men should tell you something about the character of Uriah. He was someone who was loyal to the king. He was dedicated to, protecting Israel. Just a real stand-up person. So this important information David gets here is she's married. Not only is this now the daughter of my trusted friend, she is already married. Another red flag. That should have been stop This is where we stop, draw the line. But it didn't stop him from pursuing her further. Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Now she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness. Then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David, saying, I am pregnant. So no, it didn't stop David. The only info that he focused on was her name. All he needed to know was who she was, not whose she was. And he sent messengers to get her. And it's nighttime. Her husband, her father, where are they? They're off to war. Remember, they're part of the mighty men. And what did we say? They had all gone out with Joab to battle. Can you imagine how intimidated or anxious or scared she might have felt when somebody comes to her door at night and says, the king wants to see you right now? You don't say no to the king, right? She didn't have anybody there to consult necessarily, so she goes to see him. Rather convenient, wasn't it, that they were out of town when this happened? So when she gets there, she finds out why the king called for her. And I think about how she felt in that moment, too. Ladies, and maybe some of you men, I think sometime if you haven't, you will find a time where you find yourself in a situation where, and I've been in it, and you probably have too, where you've been alone with someone of the opposite sex, and they have something on their mind that you don't. And you're kind of in a situation where you're backed in a corner. And it can be very scary. And especially if it's somebody who has power over you, like a boss or, someone has a higher power. This is not the first or the last time a man or person in power used their position to have sex with someone, to have that relationship with someone. That's what we talked about, that power corrupts. We see it played out in the media on a regular basis. We have our politicians, from local politicians all the way up to the president. We've had media stories about these things where they've gotten into these relationships and outside of their marriages or with, people that were under their command, so to speak. The Harvey Weinstein trials. There was just something not too long ago, again, that brought up. There was some new trial or something that just continues to have fallout. It created that Me Too movement where finally, women were coming forward and saying, yeah, that happened to me too. Because when it tends to happen to you, you tend not to talk about it. It's just like that opening the door on somebody you didn't want to see. You want to close the door on that and you don't want to talk about it. But that's been going on in Hollywood even before Weinstein. I saw a clip with Shirley Temple as an older woman talking about when she was a little girl now, going into the head of the movie company's office, and he's naked. And she got out of there because she laughed. She laughed at him. And her mother was with another one, and when they came out, her mother had been propositioned too. So this has been going on for a really, really long time. And it's not limited to men who are in places of power. It's just there's been more men in positions of power to do this. But there's a story in the Bible about a woman who did this. Genesis 39, 6 through 20. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. And after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even to be with her. Can you imagine? Every day she is bugging this guy. One day he went to the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him the story. "That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me, but as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. So in this case, we have a woman who is in that position of power and authority, trying to use it to have this relationship with this man. Now Joseph, he said no, but it still cost him, didn't it? He went to prison for it. That's a story for another time. But Bathsheba, was she really in a position to say no? She's a woman, which already she's low on the totem pole, so to speak. But she, if she'd have said no, what would it have cost her? Could the king have killed her for saying no? Could he have discredited her like this woman did to Joseph? He could have said, that she was a seductress and had tried to do this. She was in a position where he was in power over her. And then when you read these commentaries and they call her the seductress, I'm like, really? She's a seductress. Okay. This commentator, I want to read to you what the commentator said. "There is little doubt that this woman, later called by the name Bathsheba, acted immodestly. Though it was evening and apparently the time most people were asleep, certainly she knew that her bath was visible from the roof of the palace. Any immodesty on Bathsheba's part did not excuse David's sin, but she was still responsible for her wrong." So, even though the king was supposed to be not even home, he was supposed to be out at battle, even though it was dark, and even though most people were asleep that time, it was her fault because she was out and in her courtyard taking a bath. Does that make sense to anybody? That would be her fault? No. She was bathing. Why was she bathing? Did you pick up on that, why she was bathing? She was cleansing herself from her impurification. She had had her period. And the Jewish women then had to go through the ceremonial cleansing, taking this bath. She was in her own home. They didn't have bathrooms. They didn't have the spa bathrooms inside with the steam showers, okay? They had something, water. She may not have even been naked. She may have had some kind of clothing on. It doesn't say that she was naked. But isn't that what everybody assumes when you see the artwork? She was doing a lawful thing. She was doing something that the law required her to do. What was David doing? Not what he was supposed to be doing. Now, the significance of knowing this information, one of the things is, if this was the case, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that she was not pregnant before she was with King David. Right? So that's important. Okay? David had slept with her, and when she told him she was pregnant, there was no doubt it was his. Something else when I started kind of putting these pieces together that came to my mind is that, like I said, this was something that was it was the law, it was tradition. The women did this every month at that time. And just as David, he was higher in terms of power of her, like we said in the relationship, but he literally was higher. The palace, he was able to look down and to see. Other people, her neighbors, they couldn't they couldn't see. But he had a unique vantage point. And is it possible that this was not the first time that he had seen this? Because it's going to be on a regular basis. Oh, there she is. 28 days, 30, oh, there she is. 28, 30 days, there she is. And so then the time rolls around where all the men are going to be leaving town to go to battle, and David is still in town. Because isn't that how it goes with sin? We get a peek at it. We get a glance at it. Oh, that's interesting. What's that? It doesn't have to be this particular sin. It could, pick one. Drugs, alcohol, pornography, gambling, idolatry, anything that's sin, that appeals to our flesh. Oh, that's interesting. We see a little red flag, but we just ignore it. Then we learn, I will check into it just a little bit more. I'm not doing it. I'm adjacent. I'm just looking at it. And it's like, oh, that's not so bad. You know what? I can handle that. That's not really that bad. I don't see a problem with that. And then we get deeper and deeper and deeper into it until it has us. And that's exactly what happened to David. It started with a look, but he kept looking, and he kept pursuing. Who is that? Okay, it wasn't enough just to know who she is. I got to meet her. Go get her, bring her here. So then it wasn't enough just to see her in person. I got to have her. I've got to have her. He ignored all the red flags, all the boundary warnings. Whether or not this was the first or the 10th time he had watched her bathe, he had let the lust of his flesh get the better of him, without any thought of what the consequences would be. And then the part that really gets me is, then he sent her home. The itch had been scratched. He got what he wanted, and then he was done with her, and he sent her home. He sent her home. A lot of people, when you ask about love stories in the Bible, we talked about when we studied Ruth, that Ruth really wasn't a love story. But people will say, David and Bathsheba. Was this a love story? No, it was not. It was a story about an imbalance of power, about a king using his power for his own good, his own devices. And then she sends the word, because now the consequences come. I am pregnant, and it's going to change everything. And if you want to know more, you have to come back next time. That's it for today. Thanks.